Hello, my name's Stephen and this is Faith Ministries. In previous videos, we've had a look at some of the old Bibles that were published back in the 1500s. And the 1500s was known as a time of great renaissance, a time of enlightenment, a time where there was great literature, great paintings, artwork, and scientific discoveries were being made throughout the 1500s and 1600s. Some of those things that were done, as we tie them into the Bibles that we looked at in the past, are back in 1503, a gentleman called Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. Similarly, around 1503 or 1504, we have an artist called Michelangelo who sculpted the statue of David. Then in 1509, the king in England, Henry VIII, with his multitude of wives, he ascended the English throne. And also at the same time, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. 1513, Balboa, one of the great adventurers, sailors at the time, became the first European to actually encounter the Pacific Ocean, if you remember your history going to school. 1517, a gentleman called Martin Luther. We've covered him before. He posted his 95 theses on the church door in Wittenberg. That was the start of the Reformation within Germany itself. 1526, in England, Tyndale published his New Testament. It wasn't complete. It had revisions in the future, but in 1526, Tyndale published his New Testament. And then in 1535, the Reformation begins under Henry VIII, who makes himself head of the English Church after being excommunicated by the Pope at the time. And then in 1535, which is the Bible we've already looked at in the past, the Coverdale Bible, it was the first complete Bible printed in English there in England. 1536, Henry VIII executes his second wife, Anne Boleyn. John Calvin, now you've all heard of John Calvin. He established his Reformed and Presbyterian form of Protestantism in Switzerland, and he writes the Institutes of Christian Religion. The Bible, 1537, another Bible called the Matthew Bible, which we'll have a look at in a moment. 1539, the Great Bible was published. 1541, John Knox from Scotland led the Reformation in Scotland and established the Presbyterian Church there around 1560. 1543, the publication of the Revolution of the Heavenly Bodies by a Polish scholar called Nicholas Copernicus, which gave rise to the theory of that the earth revolved around the sun rather than the sun revolved around the earth. And then in 1553, we had Roman Catholicism was restored again to England by Queen Mary I, as we've covered her before in the past, also called Bloody Mary because of the executions, the burning at the stake of Protestants at the time. But then come along 1558, we had Queen Elizabeth I. She ascended the rule and she rules until 1603. She restores Protestantism, establishes the state church of England, or Anglicanism. And the Renaissance reaches its height in England with writers such as Shakespeare and Marlowe and Spencer. In 1560, another Bible which we looked at was the Geneva Bible, the first English Bible with the whole of the Old Testament translated from Hebrew rather than from Latin. In 1580, a gentleman called Francis Drake, or Sir Francis Drake, he returns to England after circumnavigating the entire globe of the earth, and he was knighted by the Queen Elizabeth I. And then in 1582, another Bible we looked at in the past, the Douay-Rheims New Testament, which was then completed in 1609 and to 1610. Interesting fact that you may not be aware of, that the New Testament that was put out by Tyndale, it formed the basis of about half of the King James Version, a fact that demonstrates its great worth. In fact, computer studies show that the King James New Testament is about 83% straight Tyndale from the Matthew Bible. And that's what we'll get to in a moment. And so even though it was 80 years older, the Bible translation by William Tyndale was actually easier to understand than the latter one. So what was this Matthew Bible? Well, this particular page is part of the Baruch House of Publishing.com. Here they have a rundown of the Matthew Bible, which I think sort of summarizes it pretty well. And as it says here that the William Tyndale final New Testament was translated in 1535, and it was completed just before he was captured, imprisoned, and executed in 1536. Now, a guy called John Rogers, who was Tyndale's friend, published his New Testament as a very important Reformation Bible called the Matthew Bible in 1537. So this Matthew's Bible. The instigator behind the Matthew's Bible was a gentleman called John Rogers, and he was a good friend of Tyndale. And when Tyndale had produced the majority of the New Testament, translated it and published it, but then it was executed, John Rogers then picked up the banner, as it were, and ran with it to see it completed. John Rogers was an English clergyman. He was a Bible translator, and he's also a commentator. Tyndale, who was executed, but also John Rogers, who was executed. Indeed, the Matthew Bible was born out of the blood of martyrs. As part of his work in 1534, John Rogers went to Antwerp in Belgium, and he was a chaplain there at the time with English forces. And it was there that he met William Tyndale, who's under his influence led him to abandon his Roman Catholic faith and become what we call today a Protestant. He married, and then after Tyndale's death, as I said, Rogers pushed on with his predecessor's English version of the Old Testament, because he had the New Testament, but he had to get the Old Testament finished as well. And so he started to work with a guy called Myles Coverdale, which is what we saw earlier, where Myles Coverdale, the Coverdale Bible, which was that itself was an instigation of bringing together of various translations at the time. It has been claimed that Rogers was the first person to ever print a complete English Bible that was translated directly from the original Greek and Hebrew. But there was also, they say, a reliance upon the Latin translation of the Hebrew Bible by the Sebastian Münster and published in 1534. A complete Bible, that mixture of Tyndale's New Testament, Coverdale's Older Testament, and the bringing together of texts, it was put out under the pseudonym of Thomas Matthew in 1537, printed in Paris and Antwerp by Adriana, whose wife's uncle. The pseudonym, you might be wondering, well, what is this? What is the Matthew's got to do with Coverdale? What to do with Rogers? The pseudonym Matthew was associated with Rogers, but it seems more probable, they say, that it was Matthew stood more for Tyndale's own name. It was a pseudonym for Tyndale because he was the backbone, he was the friend of Coverdale. And back then it was dangerous to actually have your name, Tyndale's name or Coverdale's name or Rogers' name associated with any particular publication of the Bible. So what did the old Matthew's Bible look like? Now we have a facsimile here, and we'll show you on this screen. On this particular screen here, as you can see, this is back in Genesis, etc. You have some of the artwork here on the left and some of the old English, 1500s English here on the right. As we clip through it, you can see how they used a lot of images, and the old text was 2-column on each page, much like we have in many of our Bibles today. That was what the old Matthew's Bible looked like, and as well as the ones that were, as we can see on the screen at the moment. As you can imagine, Bibles like the Geneva Bible, the Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible, etc., they're not very well known. They're only historical landmarks, foundations upon which we have many of our new Bibles, such as the King James, New King James, New American, New NIV, etc., are based upon to the extent. What one lady in one publishing house called the Baruch House of Publishing has done is back in 2018, they published what they call the October Testament. The October Testament is an updated version of the Matthew's Bible. or the New Matthew's New Testament, that as far as they've got. They've only done the New Testament. They haven't done the Old Testament, I believe. I think it's underway at the moment. But in 2018, they published the New Testament and called it the October Testament in 2018. And so what they did was that I believe that they've taken basically all of Roger's commentaries called notes, all of the Reformation Bible, the Matthew's Bible, etc. But they've changed the English so that it is more readable. They're not tried to it's not a translation whatsoever, but it has made the Matthew's Bible readable and something we can read even today. And so if we have a look at this particular page, we can see here in their Baruch House Publishing, they actually have the October Testament leather edition, and it's signed, etc. And that's what it actually looks like. That is the new Matthew's Bible. And you may be wondering, why do they call it the October Bible? If you have a look down here, it says that the wine-colored color of the October Testament is symbolic of the blood with which this Bible was bought. The name October Testament recalls Martin Luther's September Testament. And more significantly, however, just as the advent of October signals the approach of the end of a calendar year, so it also reminds us that the year of the Lord is drawing on to its close. So instead of calling it, with publishing it as the New Matthew Bible, or which is also called the New Matthew Bible, it is also published as the October Testament because it is done in that wine-colored cover itself. So what does this New Matthew Bible or October Testament actually read like if you want to have a look at it? So here we have a comparison between the New King James Version, which is a readable King James Version, and the New Matthew Bible. Having a look at John chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. In the New King James, as we see that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So if you're used to the New King James, you're quite familiar with that particular style of writing. And then if we go to the New Matthew Bible, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, which is the same as the New King James. And the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. So instead of saying, as we have in the New King James, he was in the beginning with God, the New Matthew Bible has the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by it, and without it was made nothing that was made. In it was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness comprehended it not. And so you can see that the New Matthew Bible still retains some of that old English feel about it. Instead of talking about him and his light and him and light and etc., it uses a lot of all things were made by it. In other words, by the Word rather than by God or by Jesus himself. Another comparison having a look at is 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8. In the New King James, it says that love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. For whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. But then the New Matthew's Bible, it says love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love is not contrary. There's an old term for it. Love is not contrary, does not swell up, does not deal dishonorably, seeks not her own, is not provoked to anger, thinks no evil, does not take pleasure in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It suffers all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Though prophesying fail, tongues cease, or knowledge vanish away, yet love never falls away. In a way, I like that the way in which it reads. It's got that old style about it. It's got almost got the part similar to the King James. It's got a literary ring to it, tone to it, but with more modern English. So there you have it, a quick overview of the Matthew Bible. A Bible that was brought together through the blood of Tyndale and of John Rogers themselves. Bible editors, Bible translators, but also martyrs. And then we had a quick look at the latest Bible. It's not a translation, but it's made it more readable. And so if you've got an interest in reading the old Matthew Bible, but in English that you can understand and read, then maybe it's worth having a look at, even purchasing an e-copy to put on your phone or your e-reader, etc. It's done by the Baruch House of Publishing. The Matthew Bible is another one of those key Bibles. It's another one of those Bibles like the Geneva Bible and the Douay-Rheims New Testament, etc. Bibles which are the foundation of so many of our new Bibles today. But in a way, as you remember, these Bibles relied upon the Textus Receptus, not upon the newer, as they say, the older translations of texts of the New Testament. So if you are a fan of these older style Bibles like the King James, then you might want to check out the Matthew Bible and even the New Matthew Bible. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and share so more people may see it. And until next time, God bless.